You are now listening to No Sky Podcast.
So what's your hype, huh?
I can show you how to get out of prison. And there's no hype.
Yeah, well, talk, Daddy. Yo, I'm listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now on the fourth episode of the No Sky Podcast, where we discuss mental health in the African American community. And today I have a very special guest, my brother, my friend. He's an activist. He is a writer. Let's give it up for our brother, Mr. Mark Tuggle. Mark, how you doing today, brother?
I'm blessed and grateful, man. How's your spirit today?
Hey, man, I'm doing well, man. I want to first off say thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. My blessings, my grace, man. I thank you so much for just humbling yourself, if you will. I reached out to you. It was like, hey, you want to be a part of the podcast. I see what you was doing. And I thought this would be a great look, man. I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast today. For those who are watching, those who don't know, introduce yourself. Where you from? What you do? What got you into the whole mental health circle? Let's just jump it off like that.
Well, I'm 60 years old. I live in Harlem. Takes a village to raise a child. And I'm an activist. I'm an educator. I'm a blogger. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a poet. I'm a writer. But this project that I'm working on is very personal.
Okay.
Because over 26 years ago, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression.
Okay.
And our society promotes medication, but my spirit needs liberation. So
amen. Right. Amen to that.
Yeah. So, they wanted me to take drugs right away, and I respectfully declined because it's my body, my choice, my life. But that kind of sent me on a path to healing. And so I had people in my life who also had mental health issues, and they gave me some suggestions like joining a support group. They suggested prayer, meditation. They suggested changing the food that I eat. They suggested nutrition, yoga, acupuncture, reading books. And, I'm a lot better today than I was 26 years ago.
Okay, now you mentioned anxiety and depression. Now, for those who don't know my story, let me back it up real quick. At 12 years old in 1994, I'm 38, so this is about 25 years ago. They tried to diagnose me with being emotionally disturbed, quote unquote bipolar depression. And much like you, unfortunately, I was a child. I was 12 years old. So I had to take the medicine that they prescribed, because my mom's being a single mother coming from the system, the food stamps, the welfare, so all that stuff. Her taking me to a psychologist, she just felt like they was doing the right thing or doing their job. So unbeknownst to her, she was like, okay, you got to be on this medication. And I found out very soon that wasn't the way that I rock. Medication wasn't my thing. How did you find out that medication wasn't your thing? Because so many today in 2021, medication is it's pushed hard, especially on amongst Black people. Why not medication for you?
I just felt like I didn't really need it. I was diagnosed with moderate depression, and there's different levels of depression.
Okay.
So I have friends who can't get out of bed for 5 days in a row. That hasn't been my experience, but I respect that. And just because I pray and I meditate, and I'm learning how to trust my instincts, and I've talked to other people who don't take medication as well. Medication is not a one-size-fits-all program for Black people. So I've learned about the principle of discernment, flexibility, and tolerance, and just learning how to advocate for myself, And also, Matthew, at the time, I was diagnosed HIV positive 3 months prior to the anxiety and depression. So I was still I'm not sure if I'm ready to take medication, the commitment, the responsibility, the discipline. I wasn't ready for all that, so I just decided not to take it.
Wow. Then you said something that really caught my attention. I'm sure it's going to catch the listeners' attention. You said you was diagnosed HIV positive. And what year was this?
This was December 19, 1994.
Okay, so that's not in the 80s, but that's not far from the 80s, because when 80s is when it really was and now I'm only 38. I was born in 82, but if I had to be honest with you, I started kindergarten like 86, 87. I would honestly say HIV back then was like the coronavirus now. It was like a sure death. It was no way of getting around it. You know what I'm saying? It was worse than cancer. You know what I'm saying? So when they told you about this, and the guy, that's like what, 4 days from Christmas? Whew.
It was six days before Christmas.
6 days before Christmas, you get diagnosed as HIV positive. What was your initial reaction to that?
I was terrified. I really thought that my life would be over. You know, I was so scared and I felt so alone. And I didn't know what to do. But thank God, you know, I had some people in my life who also were living with the virus and who were working in the human services industry. And they just kind of took me underneath their wing. And, you know, they supported me, they encouraged me, they called me every day. They told me about taking vitamins and, you know, eating healthier, always wearing a t-shirt, drinking lots of water. And again, medication is not for everybody. I got some friends who've been positive for over 30 years. They've never taken one pill. So ultimately, it's about what you believe and what are your values and what's important to your spiritual health. Because at the time, I honestly didn't know what to do, but I had people who supported me. And I was fortunate.
Now, I can only imagine diagnosed with HIV 1994. December 94, 95.
94.
94, December 19th. How old were you at the time? If you don't mind me asking.
I was 34.
34. Okay, I'm 38 now. Okay, so 34 years old. At 34 years old as a man, especially a Black man, most of us have gone through something traumatic at some point in our life. Unfortunately, growing up in America, growing up in the inner cities, definitely by the age of 34, most Black men either seen a prison cell at some point in their lives, been to prison at some point, definitely been in some type of violent situations. But your story is a big different. So being diagnosed with HIV, 34 years old, is that initially where the anxiety and the depression started?
No, it's not where it started. You know, it's deeply rooted in my childhood, but as a child and a teenager, I didn't have the emotional vocabulary to express how I felt, right? Because America is not a safe place for Black men to tell the truth about how they feel.
Amen. Amen.
So in my family, and I come from a large family, no one talked about mental health. Like those two words did not exist in anyone's vocabulary.
You know, it's funny you say that because we talk about this all the time on the podcast. Black people, when it comes to mental health, we did not talk about it for two reasons. One, we didn't want to be shamed. Two, unfortunately, we grew up where the church was the answer to everything. Most of us anyway. Now, for me growing up, my mother, you know, I guess, you know, it was actually my grandmother who told my mother, hey, Matthew has a real serious temper problem. You might want to go take him to see a doctor. Now, unfortunately, my grandma had enough sense back then, and she was probably in her late 60s at the time. So actually probably in her 70s, to be honest with you. She's probably in her 70s. So even though she was deeply rooted in a Christian church, she had enough sense to be like, you know, I'm not going to just take or tell my daughter to take my grandson to get prayed for. He needs to go see a doctor. And unfortunately, in the Black community and in the Black church, we try to pray away everything. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand why we do it because, once again, growing up Black in America, you do not want to tell anybody that you're having suicidal thoughts, depression, bipolar issues, because your own family is going to distance themselves. You know, you certainly don't want to go to your job, especially if you have a good paying one and your coworkers, you know, find out that you got some mental health issues and you are already Black. That's already one strike. Now you got mental health issues. They're going to get you up out of that building. You know what I mean? Because you're already a threat because you're Black. Now they figure you having psychological issues, suicidal issues, then that's a double threat. So you want to be able to hold down your family, especially as a man. You want to be able to hold down your family as a husband, as a father. So you keep these inner thoughts, these inner feelings to yourself because you want to put food on the table. And also many times, that's why I believe black men die so much faster than black women, or black husbands die faster than a black wife. It's because we have to take on all the stress. And by the time we turn 60, we got diabetes, we get all kinds of other issues going on, sugar, all these things going on because we, it's food is in our culture. So we eat our problems away. We try to eat a good meal. It makes us feel better, but it doesn't take the problem away. So it's such a deep rooted that we starting, I would say the past 5 years, it's 2021. I say within the past 5 years with all this police brutality going on, black people are starting, because it's traumatic if you keep watching it, and I think we finally come together as a people to say, hey, it's okay to say I'm depressed. It's okay to admit that I was sexually abused when I was a child and I just didn't know how to express my feelings. This is why I'm depressed, or bipolar issues that's going on. Let's just talk about your childhood for a minute. Is there something that happened in your childhood that caused the anxiety and the depression without going too deep into it? Was it something that happened initially, or was it just something that just a series of things, series of events?
I mean, there's a lot of things that happened to me as a child. I mean, I was physically and sexually and verbally abused more than once.
Okay.
And I never talked about it. And Iyanla Vanzant says, an anger turned inward is depression. So I was angry and didn't know how to express it. I didn't feel safe telling people I'm angry at the way I've been mistreated. And so I never felt safe as a child. I never felt appreciated as a child. And I didn't know how to deal with those feelings, and those feelings, those unresolved feelings, they harbored within me for decades, so this diagnosis in many ways it's a blessing in disguise, because for the first time in my life, I stopped to think about the inner me, the little boy on the inside, to take care of his needs, and so the anger and depression, that has been with me for a long time. But today, I've got some tools, and I've got some skills, and I have people, and there's resources, there's books I can read, there's podcasts like yours I can watch, there's videos I can look at. There's service providers out here, but the stuff that happened to me as a child, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I really suffered a lot, and it's only through grace and mercy I'm here to tell my story.
It's in respect to you, because like I was saying earlier, when I went to that psychiatric hospital for nearly 3 months, the only thing I'm guilty of is having a bad temper. Yes, I had a horrible temper. And should I have talked to somebody about it, as far as the psychologists go? Absolutely. What I realized, though, when I went into that hospital on October 31st, I went in as a boy and came out as a man. Because from that day forward, I met two people. I met God and I met the devil. That was my spiritual journey, started when I was 12 years old. And when I went into that psychiatric hospital, I couldn't have no belt and no shoestrings, because automatically you're put on suicide watch, right? And every day we would have what we call like a daybreak meeting or whatever, like an open discussion about, our feelings and things of that nature. And I was always real quiet, because I'm like, even though my only issue was a bad temper, I didn't feel comfortable telling anybody about my anger. You know what I'm saying? And my anger just really stemmed from watching my mother suffer. We was living with my grandmother for like almost 10 years. And I was angry that we lived in a upstairs room, and it was 4 of us. It was me, my brother, my mom, and my sister. For almost 10 years, we lived in one room together. And, and I was frustrated. I was ashamed to be on the food stamps. You know what I'm saying? I hated going to the grocery store and having, feel like I was less, or we was less than people who didn't have it. Now growing up in the hood we grew up in Hampton on Shell Road, a lot of people, everybody was on food stamps, but it was so like you knew it, but you didn't know. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, even if my homie mom got him, he ain't gonna tell me. It's one of those things where it's like what goes on in your household stays in your household. You know what I'm saying? So all my white friends at school, they didn't have those issues. You know what I'm saying? So it was like I was ashamed of it. That's where my anger, because I started, I was got a lot of wisdom when I was real young. So I started to see things differently and how the world turned. You know, about black and white, rich and poor, the just, the unjust, things of that nature. So when I was in that hospital, man, it was kids who would talk about how their mother molested them, how their father molested them, you know, how aunts, uncles, neighborhood friends that, family members that they trusted, friends of the family, and these were some horror stories. And I used to sit back like, yo, I'm just in here because I got a bad temper. Y'all in here because y'all really went through some trauma. You know what I'm saying? Like God, thank God, fortunately, growing up in my household, wasn't none of that type of stuff going down. My mother definitely wasn't having no man coming in the house, touching on us, nothing like that. My mother would have killed him, like for real. My mama kept a gun. You know what I'm saying? I know her mentality was like, no, you're not finna harm my children. So it was like when I heard these stories, man, I'd be like, I felt guilty. Because I'm like, yo, I'm only in here for a bad temper, but your mom did what? Or your mom allowed what to happen? Or your father did what? You know what I'm saying? Like the stories that I used to hear, and then the trauma that came from that. Like I said, I tell people all the time, man, I seen kids who were really bipolar. I knew kids who were really multiple personality disorders, schizophrenic disorder, emotionally disturbed, depression, real depression. I seen a girl try to chew her lip off, literally. I seen boys in there punching walls, breaking their wrists, breaking their arms. I seen padded rooms. I've been there. I seen kids, get extremely strong when they was on that type of medication. Them adults in there that tried to handle it, they couldn't handle us. And I'm telling you, it was a jungle in there, brother. Every single night it went down. And it was very sexual in there. And what I mean by that is you had kids my age, 12, 11 years old, we were kind of hitting puberty. So the girls in there, they were buck wild, and so were the boys. You know what I mean? And of course, I'm still a virgin at that time, you know what I'm saying? But the girls, they have been through so much sexually already, they were starting to express themselves sexually because that was the only thing that gave them a peace of mind. You see what I'm saying? So they would be in there messing with the other boys. And then the 15, 16-year-old girls, they was just as bad or worse, because by this time they're in there because they have sexual issues and they're on drugs. You know what I'm saying? That's why I thank God, even though I was on Zoloft, Ritalin, Paxil, nortriptyline, all these high medications, I never liked the way it made me feel. So I vowed to myself I would never get addicted to drugs or alcohol because I knew at a young age what it could do to you, because I seen what them kids was going through. I know what it looks like for a child to be having hallucination issues and things of that nature. So I vowed to myself never to be on drugs or alcohol. Now, in your story, did you ever go through that period in your life where drugs and alcohol became a friend to you because of your depression? Or did you just stay on more so of a spiritual righteous path to deal with your issues?
No, I did use alcohol and I did use drugs, but I wouldn't call them a friend.
Definitely. Yeah. We learned that. Yeah.
I mean,
nighttime demons for real.
Yeah. I mean, initially I was just curious, but eventually I became addicted. And, through grace and mercy, I've been clean over almost 26 years. So that's another part of my story too, is healing from addiction, alcohol, drugs, food, sex, clothes, money, just anything that fills that void on the inside.
Now, it's funny you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned that because the listeners need to hear this. Did y'all hear what he said? He said clothes, money, sex, natural things, that could become of the unnatural. And to touch on what you were saying, no, I wasn't never addicted to drugs. No, I was never addicted to alcohol. But when I was in 7th grade at 14 years old, I became addicted to pornography. Because pornography is what was my release. It was what gave me a peaceful mind from everything I had went through in that hospital. And then being placed in special education for 6 years, that was depression. That was extremely depressing. So I turned to pornography, and eventually that pornography led to female prostitutes. Now it goes from, because whatever you see, your mind is your art that will imitate your life. Because whatever you allow yourself to keep seeing, eventually you're going to be a part of it. So when I kept watching pornography, at some point, that wasn't gratifying anymore. I took it to a next level. Started dealing with prostitutes, got into the drug business, petty hustling, nothing. I wasn't no major drug dealer, nothing like that. But being introduced to the prostitutes, they introduced me to the drug business, So it's amazing how when we don't take care of ourselves or we try to avoid our issues, how one thing leads to another, and eventually, prison or the graveyard with any of those choices.
That's why I think it's important that we encourage, particularly young boys, to talk about how they feel, and that they have a space where they feel safe and they feel affirmed, and they can open up about the stuff that they're going through. Because sometimes you never really know what a person's going through, because they may, on the outside, they got the job, they got the whip, they got the wife and kids. Everything looks like they're socially acceptable. But on the inside, there's all this pain and suffering and trauma that they never talked about. And you can't take a look at what you don't talk about. And you can't change what you don't admit. So it's really important that young boys have a place where they can go and just say, I feel insecure. I feel uncomfortable. I feel sad. I feel stressed out. I feel threatened. Whatever the feeling is, they need that space. A lot of times they don't have that space. And that leads to the drugs, the alcohol, the food, the sex, the pornography, all kinds of stuff, man, trying to fill that void.
And you know what's crazy? Not just the boys, and a lot with the females. One thing I have to be very honest about, I've noticed as I got older and, going out, dating, things of that nature, a lot of Black women were molested when they were children. And unfortunately, when I was dealing with prostitutes, I found out a lot about that. Because one thing about when I was dealing with prostitutes, I always remained a gentleman, even though what I was doing was wrong. The prostitutes would open up to me because of who I was, how I carried myself. I didn't carry myself like I was this dog dude, that, what I'm saying? None of that. So they would open up to me, and a lot of them would tell me how they were molested when they were kids. Things, they was raped, from a man that they trusted. And I've learned that a lot of promiscuous Black women have a history of sexual molestation, or rape. And this is their way of trying to deal with those, like, once again, those voids, which really they need love, that needs to fill that void, but they try to find it in other men, because they don't talk about the rape. They don't talk about the molestation. You know what I mean? So it's like, once again, it becomes a cycle, and now when they have children and their daughter is trying to tell them, hey, mom, your boyfriend is touching on me, or he looks at me in a way that makes me uncomfortable. Now it's like, unfortunately, a lot of times, because what happened to them, they felt like they dealing with it. Oh, well, it's like, this is what happens, or you're going to be okay because I'm okay. When really all you're doing is you're creating a cycle of trauma.
But you know what, Matthew? I agree with you. There are a lot of women who've been molested, but the same thing is true of men. And
definitely, no doubt.
Yeah, but we don't talk about it. You know what I mean? I've done harm reduction counseling, risk reduction counseling, transitional counseling. Almost every guy that had a problem with drugs was either raped or molested or incested as a child. Like, that was like a combination. You know what I mean? And a lot of times men or boys don't feel safe to say somebody touched me, whether it was a male or a female, right? And so the perception is sexual abuse is something that mostly happens to girls and women, especially with the Me Too movement, right? Or the feminist movement or intersectionality. But there's so many boys and men that I'm aware of professionally, even personally, who've experienced the same thing, but they don't talk about it openly. So we just never know about it.
Well, and once again, it goes back to that being a man, and you want that masculinity. You know what I mean? And one thing I know for a fact, and one thing I want to get out, and I want people to understand something. Regardless if you're a straight man or a gay man or whatever, at the end of the day, every man, for the most part, has that masculinity in them, regardless of what you choose to be. It's natural. So in our mind, it's like, it's not manly or to talk about those type of situations because you feel vulnerable. You know what I mean? You don't want nobody to know, even though it wasn't your fault, because you were 7 years old, that your uncle came and put his hands in places that he should have never put his hands in, or your aunt for that matter, because women do it too. Let's talk real talk. Women do it too. And that's not talked about enough either, because there are plenty of men who was molested by the aunt, their mom's friend, you know what I mean? Their own sister, cousins, you know what I'm saying? So,
that goes back to the plantation.
Yeah. And so it's like, as a man, it's like, I don't want to, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I'll be so honest. When I was in that hospital, that was the first time ever I ever saw that type of activity, as far as a boy trying to touch another boy.
How long were you in the hospital?
I was in there for almost 3 months.
Okay.
So I would say within the first 2 weeks I was in there, I remember a situation where this boy snuck into another boy's room and, climbed on top of him and tried to rape him. These is 11, 12-year-old boys. What do you even know about sex?
Right.
Let alone rape. You know what I'm saying? That was the first time I ever encountered that. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, once again, this is very shocking to me because I don't come from that type of household, that type of tolerance, none of those things. You know what I'm saying? So my first initiation was protect myself at all times, because I do come from that type of environment too. Like, let nobody put their hands on you, let nobody, abuse you or none of that. And it was just recently, a few years ago, I could even open up and tell my mom about what happened in there. You know what I'm saying? Because I was approached sexually, by another boy. You know what I'm saying? And I had to put him in his place. Like, I don't rock like that. That ain't how I know. You know what I'm saying? And fortunately, he had enough sense to know that he couldn't physically handle me, and as far as, throwing hands or whatever. So he knew to back off. But at the same time, I was approached for the first time ever sexually in my life by a female. You see what I'm saying? Because I remember I'm 12 years old. You know what I'm saying? No 12-year-old boy or girl has any business touching each other sexually in any type of way. You shouldn't even be thinking about that type of stuff. So it wasn't just the boys in it. It was the females too, man. And it was rampant. You know what I mean? And when the counselors would be there at night, the overnight counselors, they didn't know what was going on. And the thing about it was one hallway. It was where the counselors sat in the front. It was one hallway, right? The boys on the left side, the girls on the right. And there'd be like rodents running across the carpet. Girl running to that boy's room. This boy running into that girl's room. You know what I'm saying? This was going on all night. And it was even worse because I had to be in the adolescent unit because for the first 2 weeks, they didn't have a bed for me in my area that I was in with the 11, 12-year-olds. So I was in there with the 13 to 17-year-olds. And then it was an 18 to, was considered adults. So I was in there from the 13 to the 17-year-olds. And let me tell you something, bro. It was like that. It was like that all night long. It was like that.
They talk about mental health services in that facility?
Well, yeah, it was a psychiatric hospital, but that was the thing.
Okay.
that was the thing, Mark. It was like, and as I got older, I used to question this. I used to think about this to myself. I'm like, did these kids, was that a mental health problem, or they was just expressing themselves? You know what I'm saying?
Did you guys have support groups where you talked about?
Oh, you know what? Yes, and I'm gonna tell you what's crazy. I remember we had a situation with masturbation, and it was like running rampant. And it was, it's funny now, man, but it wasn't funny then because it was like counselors that was catching boys and counselors that was catching girls.
Wow.
So they had to send letters out to all our parents or guardians at the time because there was a lot of foster kids in there. That was in the foster program. So when my mom got her letter, my mom immediately comes up there. She's, I went a one-on-one with the counselor, and I never forget that she was a white lady. I can't remember her name, man. It was in the meeting room, and she suggested to my mother that I do that. Like, well, he's got that age where he's going to explore himself, and my mom was like, nah, no, he ain't, no, he's not doing none of that. You know what I'm saying? So, that was man. Hormones is, man. I'm not gonna lie, man. Hormones was like that. And one thing I want to tell people: don't think because it's a psychiatric hospital, you're in there with kids who's like throwing feces and drinking urine, or females who don't take care of themselves. It was some very attractive females in there, and that's what blew my mind the most because I'm like, I like girls, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, to some degree, it was like, man, the homies around the way knew what I was seeing, they would have a ball, you know what I'm saying? Especially the older ones. But it was like that.
This was a teenage facility?
Okay, so it was split up. It was teenagers and it was an adult. It was a teenage unit and an adult unit.
Oh, okay.
And then you had kids in there who got kicked out of juvenile hall because they just couldn't deal with them, so they put them in these hospitals because they were trying to figure out, is just a mental health problem or do you have other issues? You know what I'm saying? So I was in there with kids who was very, 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 and females, man, who was very sexually active, man. And like I said, they would get up in the morning and like we had school. So, you know what I'm saying? So girls would get up, put their makeup on, put their outfits on, like we're going to school because they want to look fly because it was dudes in there. You know what I'm saying? And I was one of the dudes who wanted to look fly. You know what I'm saying? And at the time, I was just starting to really get my build because I was a football player. So my physique was starting to come in. It was, so it was like girls 15, 14 years, 16, 17 years old trying to get at me. 12 years old because it had nothing else. It was nobody else in there. You know what I'm saying? So that whole experience, man, that I went in that hospital not having an addiction to anything. Came out of that hospital with addiction to pornography, because that I would have to say was the most traumatic thing that happened to me was the sexual part, because I couldn't tell my mother about it. You know what I'm saying? I was too embarrassed to tell my brother that this boy tried to approach me sexually. Like, I'm not telling my big brother that because he's gonna want to go in there. He gonna want to go take care of that boy. Like, nah, you know what I'm saying? So I couldn't tell nobody. So I kept all those things in. And,
And also sometimes if you tell somebody that, they start making assumptions.
Exactly. It's always that thought in the back of your mind.
They
Like
start
they
to question your gender, your manhood, your sexuality. Did you bring it on? You know what I'm saying? So that can create anxiety too when you're constantly defending yourself.
Exactly. So I just pushed it in the back of my mind and, became addicted to pornography. And that was my safe haven, and like I said, later on down the road came, the prostitute. So it was like, how and that question, and I was addicted to prostitutes for like, man, probably like 14, 15 years. So it was like, I wonder at times if I would have told my mom or somebody who I trusted about what went down in that hospital, would that have stirred me away from the pornography? Because I'm a virgin at 12 years old. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I'm a virgin and I know I should be putting my hands on those girls and letting girls put their hands on me. But at the same time, I like it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I know in my mind, it's say, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is a good thing. You know what I'm saying? You're just too young to be doing this. You know what I'm saying? So, and that was my way to escape what was going on around me. Because like I said, there was boys in there, man, who every single night would get into it with the staff and a fight broke out every single night. It was a fight. I had to learn how to make weapons. I had to learn how to, make things to take care of myself, to protect myself. You know, it was girls in there who knew how to carry razor blades, and they was pulling them out. You know, I seen girls in there get busy. You know, 12, 13, 15-year-old girls, man, whoop a grown woman. You know, like it was nothing, you know what I mean? Because once you get that medication was like hallucinations. You get that medication in, you become Hulk. You know, you become a super type of strength. You know, a different type of person when that medication gets into you, man. They can't control you. You know, I've seen
anybody there who didn't take medication?
No, everybody took medication, you know, and then they had what they call the 5-point restraints. Like, you know how somebody gets like a car accident and then they'll bring the ambulance out there, but the ambulance had like this wooden board they will put the person on and like lift them up and put them inside the ambulance or whatever. Well, they had one of those in there. It was called a papoose board. And the papoose board was like that. It was a wooden board and it had Velcro straps, like probably like 5 of them. So I seen kids get put inside these Velcro straps and they will wrap them with like 25 sheets, like a mummy, all the way from their neck down. And they will put them in there for like an hour and a half. I thought that was torture, man. I done seen people get put in padded rooms. You know what I'm saying? I done seen girls get into fights with other females, man, and literally try to rip their eye sockets out. Like, really? And when you got 2 people that's both on medication and they lose it and they flipping out, ain't no stopping that. You know, and all this stuff I seen at 12 years old, I shouldn't have saw it. But like I said, I thank God I saw it because it built a person inside of me that made me so much stronger. So now at 38 years old, I'm not shook by a lot of things in life because I seen it when I was young. You know, violence doesn't scare me the way it scares other people. I know how to remain calm in a violent situation. You know what I mean? Regardless if that's good or bad, because of where I had to go through it, I don't know. But I thank God, you know, I don't get scared like that. You know what I mean? Because I know how to conduct myself in a violent situation because I had to deal with it, you know? So that's what, you know, that's what made the situation so traumatic. Now, through your situation, have you ever had to be hospitalized because of your situation?
I've never been hospitalized in my life for nothing. I guess God was looking out for me, you know?
Definitely, because, you know.
I mean, even with the HIV, I'm asymptomatic. I don't have any opportunistic infections. I've never been hospitalized, like I said. I take 1 pill a day and my viral load is undetectable. So that's a blessing because I know people don't die of HIV, they died of, you know, AIDS-related complications like cancer or corpus sarcoma or, you know, there's a whole bunch of illnesses that the CDC puts out, but no one dies of HIV. But I've seen people come and go.
I know that's real that you said that because like I was saying, man, like to get HIV in the 80s, man, it was a sore enough.
They told you had 6 months to live.
Yeah. You know, and then I still to this day, with the whole Eazy-E situation, man, like it's like what type of AIDS did he have? Like what, you know what I'm saying? Like, cause you know, in the biopic, it was like straight AIDS. Like, I don't even think he even got HIV. It was just like, bam, he got AIDS, and bam, he was dead like 7 weeks later.
That's how it was. You know, in the 80s, people were going like, because all they had was AZT, and AZT at the time was very expensive. So
is that like a medication?
Yeah, it was a drug, but the FDA, it takes them 5 years to approve a drug. So people were not lasting 5 years.
So do you think that's what Matthew Johnson took?
I'm not sure, but you know, Matthew Johnson was diagnosed in 91, and obviously he had access to the best doctors, the best medication. It's been almost 30 years since he was diagnosed. Everyone has their own feeling about taking medication. Everyone doesn't take medication for HIV.
Well, that I didn't know. I thought that was something that you had to take, you know, pretty much to function.
I mean,
you know?
Normally, if your T cells are below 500, it's suggested that you begin some type of what they call antiretroviral medication. But again, it's your choice. I mean, you're the patient.
Now, let me ask you this question. You have a project going on now, and it's called Cultural Silence Wounded Souls.com. Speak on that.
It's an intergenerational anthology. It's called Cultural Silence, Wounded Souls, Black Men Speak About Mental Health. And most of the men from all walks of life have contributed an essay, either about their personal experiences or their professional views. So I've had people, musicians, rappers, educators, advocates, journalists, filmmakers, scholars, all types of people from all across the country, people of African descent, men of African descent. Most of them are essays, but some of them are there's poetry, there's a couple of monologues, there's some hip hop lyrics. But it's an opportunity for people to learn about other men who are dealing with this taboo subject. You know, because like you said, 5 years ago, a lot of our brothers publicly were not admitting that they're dealing with anxiety, depression, isolation, loneliness, suicide. So now it's not as silent as it used to be. So you hear people like Brandon Marshall, the football player, Big Sean has talked about his issues. Kyrie Irving, Paul George, they talked about having mental health issues. Wayne Brady, Trevor Noah, The Rock, DMX. He recently transitioned. He was open about his issues. Kanye West. So it's becoming less and less, invisible. So this book is an opportunity for people to learn about their experiences.
Gotcha. And once again, what is the website where the listeners can go to purchase this book?
Okay, now the book is not complete.
Okay. So
I'm still getting submissions in. I think the deadline is May 31st. Okay. But I have a website, www.culturalsilencewoundedsouls.com. culturalsilencewoundedsouls.com. And there's a media page where there are men who talk about depression, anxiety. There's a video. There's a couple of videos around Black men depression. There's a resources page on the website where you can learn about books to read, podcasts such as yours to watch. There are hashtags, there are helplines, service providers. There's stuff online. There's so much that people have access to now that didn't have 5 and 10 years ago. You can call the 809. You can call a service provider. You can read a book. You can watch a podcast. You can go to YouTube and you can learn about what you're going through and feel less alone, less afraid, and less ashamed.
No doubt, man. I'm thankful. I'm definitely thankful that you took the time out to create that website, because like you were talking about all the athletes and rappers and entertainers who I definitely wanted to get on my podcast, because, this platform is about mental health and it's about our culture, what we go through as Black men and Black women when it comes to mental health. Because like you said, this is a taboo subject. It's getting better, but it's still not where it should be. And prayerfully and hopefully in the near future, podcasts like myself and brothers and sisters like you who are open about your situations and what you've gone through continue to come on the podcast so we can chop it up and, get this out there into the public and get it out to the open. That is nothing wrong, Black men and Black women, to discuss your current mental health state. You need to talk about that. It will save your life. It will save your marriage. It will save your relationship with your children, with your community in general. Yeah. So we are thankful to have Mr. Tuggle, Mr. Mark Tuggle on our podcast. And in closing, Mr. Tuggle, where can they find you at on social media?
I'm everywhere. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. So you catch me there.
Okay, what's your tag for what's your Instagram tag?
Instagram is Mark Judge Tuggle, one word. And then Twitter is Mark Tuggle 4, the number 4. I have an email address, mjt975@msn.com. And then you can catch me on the website as well.
All right. Well, y'all heard it. Once again, this has been an episode, No Sky episode, where we talk about mental health in the Black community. We want to be thankful once again for having our guest, Mr. Mark Tuggle, activist, actor, book writer and inspiration, activist. If I didn't mention that, I'll mention it again. Writer, a conscious brother. You know, he's definitely been through a lot. He's, you know, told us a little bit about his story. Make sure you go on that. His website is culturalsilencewoundedsoul.com. Make sure you check him out on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Hey, make sure you get out this brother. There's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that he can kick off. This has been another episode of No Sky Podcast. We'll see you next time. Peace.